Well, it is the first time the world's leaders are coming together for a G20 summit in Africa. But the U.S. will not be attending the summit this weekend. And it has warned South Africa, the host country, not to issue any declaration in its absence. The Trump administration is boycotting the meeting over unsubstantiated claims of persecution of white South Africans. So how effective can the G20 really be? DW's Diane Hawker reports tonight.
A proud moment for South Africa as the host of the first G20 World Leaders Summit held on African soil. Presidents and representatives from many of the world's largest economies, along with the European and African unions, will gather in Johannesburg. However, there will be one notable absence. US President Donald Trump and members of his administration are boycotting the event.
We have a G20 meeting in South Africa. South Africa shouldn't even be in the Gs anymore because what's happened there is bad. I'm not going. I told him I'm not going. I'm not going to represent our country there. It shouldn't be there.
The bad things Trump is referring to are allegations of a genocide against Afrikaners, a white minority group in South Africa.
Welcome to the United States of America.
He has extended special refugee status to any Afrikaners who want to relocate to the United States. South Africa's government has repeatedly rejected these allegations, saying there is no evidence to support the claims of genocide. South Africa's Foreign Minister, Ronald Lamola, warns that the US's boycott could have an impact on the G20 in future.
If I am absent and the institution cannot function, it means the next G20, someone will have a reason not to go to the US and cite whatever. Does it mean that, therefore, there can't be a declaration in the US? It moves to UK, someone has another, and it's 20 countries. You can always have a reason in any country. I mean, out of 20, one will have an issue or a reason of some sort. So this can completely paralyze the G20's work and its function.
South Africa has put the issues of global debt and inequality on this year's agenda, issues that are of particular importance to African states. When it hands over to the next G20 president at the end of this conference, it'll be handing over to the United States. And with diplomatic ties frayed, it's unclear how many of these topics will make it onto the US agenda. International relations researcher Gisaubaka Mopipi says work can go ahead despite the absence of the US.
There will definitely be an impact, especially given that there isn't really precedence around this kind of situation and how it's been handled before. However, I think also it's important to acknowledge that the Leaders Summit is not just a one-day or two-day event. It's the culmination of work that has already been done throughout the course of the year across the different working groups, many of which have been able to achieve consensus on some of the issues that South Africa has placed on the agenda.
Prime Minister.
South Africa is adamant that its G20 presidency will end with some sort of declaration, even if it is the less significant chairperson's statement. But if President Cyril Ramaphosa can convince those present to sign on the dotted line, it could send a strong message to Washington.
Well, for more, I'm joined now by Stephen Chan. He's a professor of world politics at the School of Oriental and African Studies at the University of London. Professor, it's good to have you with us. The U.S. president says he's boycotting this year's G20 because of a genocide against white Afrikaners in South Africa. Do you believe that that is the only reason why Trump doesn't want to go to this meeting?
I think it's part of Trump's war against multilateralism, part of his America First agenda. No one else matters, but he also has a bias against Africa. He's accusing Nigeria on totally unsubstantiated grounds, for instance, of all kinds of things, in much the same way as he's been accusing South Africa. It's almost as if he's got a bias against Africa, but I think chiefly a bias against multilateralism. So this G20 is going to be very interesting to see whether or not multilateralism can be reasserted in international relations.
And beyond multilateralism, the U.S. Embassy in South Africa, it says that the G20 priorities run counter to U.S. policy views. And I mean, among those are calls for just energy transition and debt sustainability for low-income countries. So with that in mind, what does this tell us then, or what does it tell you about the priorities of the United States?
Priorities of the United States are very much burying head in sand over these very key issues. Without some kind of agenda for debt relief or debt reduction, in fact, the United States will not be able to trade as profitably with African countries. So basically, what you've got to do is to build in order to be able to extract benefit in the future. So it's a very, very short-sighted policy that's been declared by the US, which is not shared with a very great number of influential US leaders.
Do you see the United States isolating itself because of President Trump's stance?
They're already isolated. It'll be very interesting to see at this G20 what the Chinese and the Russian delegations say. If they emphatically side with the G20 and Cyril Ramaphosa's chairmanship of the G20, then that would be a very calculated slap in the face of the United States. Other major world leaders from the West, like Starmer from the United Kingdom, other leading figures from the emerging world, like Modi from India, they're all very much there. And just being there is an expression of support for what Ramaphosa is trying to do. It's an expression of support for Africa, for South Africa. And already it is a riposte to Trump. Trump is isolated, and he didn't have to be. It was very, very foolish on his part.
Do you think that there could be pushback from Russia at the G20, considering what we're seeing right now with this peace plan for Ukraine?
Basically, there'll be a polite form of words. This will be expressed diplomatically, but reading between the lines, I think there'll be no doubt that particularly the Chinese will make a riposte against the stand of the United States. They're represented at the G20 at prime minister level. It's not an insignificant level. This prime minister has been touring other African countries before the G20. He was in Zambia just a couple of days ago, for instance. He's expressing an interest in Africa and Africa's agenda. So already by doing that ahead of the G20, a signal is being sent to countries like the United States.
Professor Stephen Chan with the University of London. Professor, we appreciate your time and your insights tonight. Thank you.